You start at zero, no money, no connections, no hidden trust fund, quietly compounding in the background. And yet some people turn that exact starting point into billions, not millions, billions. So either they're superhuman or there's a system you haven't been shown. Because the uncomfortable truth is this: nobody becomes a billionaire by earning money. They do it by controlling how money moves. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Right now, most people are playing a very simple game. You trade time for money. You save what you can. You invest a little. Maybe you buy a house. Maybe you retire. It's clean, predictable, safe, and it almost guarantees you will never become extremely wealthy. Because this entire model is built around one assumption: that money comes from effort. But at scale, that's not how the system works. At scale, money comes from leverage. Let's start from zero. No capital means you can't invest. No capital means you can't acquire assets. No capital means you can't play the rich person game. So what's the first move? It's not saving. It's not investing. It's positioning. Because before money multiplies, access multiplies. And access comes from proximity to something that already scales. This is where most people take the wrong path. They chase income, high-paying jobs, freelance gigs, side hustles. And yes, income matters. But income alone doesn't scale fast enough to reach extreme wealth. Even if you earn $500,000 a year, it would take you 2,000 years to reach $1 billion. So clearly, income is not the strategy. It's just the entry point. The real shift happens when you stop asking, how do I make money? And start asking, what can I be close to that already makes money at scale? Because billionaires don't build from scratch in isolation. They attach themselves to systems that already move massive amounts of capital. Technology platforms, financial systems, distribution networks, large markets with built-in demand. From zero, your goal is not ownership, not yet. Your goal is access. Think about it. If you work inside a system that generates millions, you start to understand how millions are generated. Not theoretically, operationally, where the margins are, where the bottlenecks are, where are the inefficiencies hiding, and more importantly, where the leverage is. Because every large system has points where small inputs create massive outputs, and those points are rarely obvious from the outside. This is where the strategy quietly evolves. You're no longer just participating, you're observing, mapping, identifying where control is weak and value is concentrated. Because here's the hidden mechanism. Wealth doesn't come from activity. It comes from controlling high leverage points inside systems. Let's make that concrete. Imagine a business that sells a product. Most people focus on the product, improving it, marketing it, selling more of it. But the billionaire move is different. They look for what controls the flow. Is it distribution? Is it the platform? Is it the financing behind it? Is it the infrastructure everyone depends on? Because whoever controls the flow controls the outcome. This is why, over time, the strategy shifts again. From access to ownership. But not just any ownership. Strategic ownership. Ownership of something that others depend on. Something that sits between value creation and value capture. And here's where things get uncomfortable, because to move from access to ownership, you usually don't use your own money. You use other people's money. Debt, equity, investor capital. At small scales, debt is risky. At large scales, debt is a tool. The same thing that traps individuals, accelerates institutions. This is the part nobody explains clearly, because from the outside, it looks like success. But underneath, it's a very precise financial structure. You identify an asset or system that produces a predictable cash flow. You use borrowed capital to acquire or control it. That asset pays for the debt, and the excess becomes yours. Repeat that enough times, and you're no longer working for money. Money is working through structures you control. Now here's the twist. At this level, the game changes again. Because once you control assets, you gain something more valuable than income. You gain influence over how capital is allocated. And that's where exponential growth really begins. Because capital doesn't flow randomly, it flows toward perceived safety, scale, and influence. If you control something large enough, capital starts coming to you. Opportunities come to you. Deals come to you. Not because you chase them, but because your position makes you unavoidable. This creates a feedback loop. Control leads to capital. Capital increases control. Increased control attracts more capital. And suddenly, growth is no longer linear. It's compounding at a system level. Now compare this to the public narrative. Work hard, save diligently, invest wisely. None of that is wrong, but it's incomplete. Because it keeps you operating at the level of money, instead of the level of systems, the system doesn't reward effort equally. It rewards leverage asymmetrically. A small number of people control key points, and the majority participate around them. That's not a conspiracy. It's structure. And here's the irony. The moment you start understanding this, you also start seeing the limitations. Because this strategy isn't clean, it involves risk. It involves concentration. It involves making decisions with incomplete information and large consequences. And sometimes it involves benefiting from systems that don't distribute outcomes evenly. So no, there isn't a simple step-by-step path from 0 to $1 billion, but there is a pattern. You move from effort to access, from access to insight, from insight to control, from control to capital, and from capital to influence. Each step removes you further from labor and closer to leverage. But here's the part most people don't want to confront. If this is how wealth is actually built, then the question isn't just how do you become a billionaire? The question is, what happens to everyone else in a system where wealth concentrates this way? Because if the game rewards control over participation, then participation alone will never be enough. And that leaves you with an uncomfortable choice. Do you keep playing the visible game, where effort feels fair but scales slowly? Or do you try to understand and eventually enter the invisible one, where the rules are harder to see, but the outcomes are exponentially larger? Because once you see how the system really works, you don't just learn how billionaires are made, you start to realize why are they so hard to stop.